And I cannot defend your position.
Welcome to a brand new episode of The Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with author, musician, filmmaker, and podcaster Jimi Fritz. He is a self-proclaimed heterodoxical polemicist, a skeptical polymath, an iconoclast antitheist, and an aficionado of Stoicism. Overall, he's a lucky guy with a great story. His latest book is called Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer, and it's a psychedelic travelogue memoir. He gets into this book, culture, society, laws, norms, and much more. Enjoy this interview.
Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, how you doing?
Joe Dimino, man. How you doing?
Okay, good.
Hey, good. Thanks for taking a minute out today.
Sure.
I want to start off here with, how did you do during COVID? How was that period for you? How did it change you? How did you survive now that things are opening up?
It didn't really affect me too much. We would kind of work from home anyway. I'm a writer. My wife's an artist. We work from home. We have a business, a mail order business too, from home. So it didn't really affect our work life that much, and we got out and about, and we weren't the most conscientious people in the world either. So we had small gatherings of friends that came over regularly, and we kept our social life going. And so it didn't affect us anywhere near as much as other people. People living in small places or on their own or whatever, or people that had to go to work and lost their jobs. And I think it was a catastrophe for many people, but we were largely unscathed.
So where are you coming out of?
I'm in Vancouver.
Okay, I got you. All right, excellent. So talk to me a little bit about your book. I'm curious, Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer. How long did it take for you to get to a point where you decided that you were going to write this book and for it to actually come into fruition?
It's been in the back of my mind for a long time. I wrote a book about rave culture. It's called Rave Culture: An Insider's Overview by Jimi Fritz. That's available everywhere online too. And that was quite a while ago now, so like almost 20 years ago. So I always knew that I had another book in me, and it was always going to be something about, psychedelics. And I thought it was going to be probably a fiction book. But as we got closer to it, a friend of mine was writing a memoir, and I thought, memoir, I never thought of writing a memoir because I didn't think people were that interested in me as an individual, because they wouldn't know me. I thought memoirs were mostly for celebrities. But anyway, I thought I could weave my experiences over the last 50 years with psychedelics and travel and weave that into, a statement about responsible drug use. So that's basically what it is.
So before I get into that part of, even legislation and things that are going on here in the States, talk to me a little bit about where you were born and raised. Where are you from, and kind of how did you get this motivation to write and get to where you're at today?
Well, I was born in England originally, and I lived there until I was in my early 20s. So I grew up and went to school there. And then I just felt like I had to get out. So I went traveling. And I did a lot of traveling in Europe for many years, traveling around all the European countries and around the Mediterranean mostly. And I was playing guitar in the street, actually in the cafes. So you start at one end of the town and you go from cafe to cafe and you sing two songs. One you go through and one you come back and collect the money. So that was a pretty good living for a few years. And then I started traveling, overland and North Africa and overland Asia. So I've had a lot of experiences traveling and being on the road. I was on the road for, 10 or 15 years on and off with a wealth of experience that I wanted to sort of write about one day. And I guess I was just storing up memories and things. I didn't really have the time and I didn't really have a place to write. And so it wasn't until much later that when I settled down in Canada, in Vancouver, I got involved in the rave scene. So I became a rave promoter for many years. And during that process of putting on raves and that whole, whole social movement. It was I was quite impressed with what was going on. So I wanted to write about that. That was the first writing I did. Oh, I'd written some screenplays because I was a filmmaker before that. So I went to film school and I wrote a couple of feature-length screenplays and tried to shop one and just try to sell it and tried to make another one. And we got pretty close. But, it's a very, very complicated business and everything takes forever and you need the complicity of 100 different people to get a film made. I thought, I'll just... and then I thought I'd make a documentary because I was making documentaries at the time. I thought I'd make a documentary on rave culture. So we made a proposal and shopped it around everywhere, all the local funders and, TV stations and whatnot. And nobody would really step up. So I thought, okay, I'll write the book. Because with a book, you can just sit down and you can just do it. You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need a budget. You don't need to get anybody's approval. You don't need 20 different partners. You could just sit down at your computer and write anything you want and go anywhere you like. You can go to Mars and back, and there's no problem with the budget. So that was very liberating. So after I did the rave book, I had this one in mind and then finally wrote it. And I guess that's what I was, that's what I used my time during the pandemic when there was not a lot of other stuff going on. I used that time to just write for five hours a day till it was done. It took about a year.
Okay. What's the most common misperception from the public about the rave culture?
About rave culture? Oh, there's just a bunch of teenagers off their head on drugs. It wasn't really about that. It was about social cohesion. It was about people getting together and creating community. It was about authentic connection, and drugs were a part of that. I mean, MDMA is a very powerful empathogen. It engenders a feeling of empathy. And that's what a lot of people are missing in their lives. They don't have meaningful connections. Everybody's isolated in their own little worlds. And we're so formal and there's so many protocols that you can't really... It's hard to have meaningful human connections. And that's really the most important thing for human psychology, human psychological health, is those kinds of authentic, real connections. And people had that at raves. People went to raves and they got high on MDMA and they danced to music which created, an environment, it created a trance state. And then people just saw each other for who they were and they saw themselves for who they were. They connected with themselves. They connected with other people. And it was a very, very powerful experience. And over the course of about 8-9 years that I was promoting raves, I saw people's lives changed and transformed routinely every week. Well, every month, usually we did the big ones. So it was an incredibly powerful movement, and that's what people never saw. All they saw was, the scare stories on the news.
I think that's the thing about it, too, that I find in the States is that people get weird about the city or urban culture, and they think that's where all the crime's happening. But it's actually, I believe, safer there than it is in the suburbs. I think things happen just as much, if not in a more nefarious way in the suburbs. And it's kind of like that. There's always this media perception of things, what people are shoveled versus what you're saying right now, which is, there's a lot of positives. There's a lot of human connections that are made in that environment.
Yeah, exactly. It's where culture is fomented. It's where the new ideas come from. It's where the creativity comes from. In urban environments, look at the blues, look at rock and roll, look at punk music, all these movements and art movements too. The ones that really shook things up are the ones that are fomented in a boiling pot of culture. And that's where those things come from. They don't come from people sitting on the porch in the country.
Yeah, right. So, the one thing that we're doing here in Kansas City, Missouri, is Missouri overall is trying to figure out if they're going to legalize marijuana. They have it medicinally. What's your take on that? Doesn't it seem archaic and antiquated for us to even worry about it? I mean, we have states that have done this. Their crime rate hasn't gone any higher than any other place that has legal, liquor or whatever else, and it's actually alleviating a lot of their financial woes to do it. I don't understand. What's your take on that, on legalizing things?
Well, I think it'll all be legalized at some point. I mean, that's the way it's going. If you look at the progression of what's happening, things get legalized for medical use first, and then they get legalized for recreational use, and then we don't worry about them anymore. And I think most drugs will go that way, even psychedelics now. There's municipalities and even states which are legalizing mushrooms now. In Canada here, we have federal legalization of recreational marijuana. So it's 100% legal here. It's on exactly the same footing as alcohol. So you can buy it anywhere. There's lots of stores. There's a real industry going on. It's a huge industry, and the government's getting their taxes, and everybody's sort of happy. There are some lumps and transitional lumps, but all in all, it's a good thing, of course. I mean, the main reason it's a good idea is this: we got to stop people putting people in jail for getting high. I mean, it's their mind, it's their brain, and they should, as autonomous human beings, I think it's one of the most basic human rights that we have the right to explore our own consciousness and do what we want with it.
So you're a very creative person, music and writing. I'm curious, who have been inspirations for you in the realm of whether it's writing or music that have really inspired what you do and how you approach it?
My criteria for music and art and creativity in general is it's got to be original and authentic. So those are I don't care about popularity. In fact, the more popular anything is, the less interested I am in it. So I'm really interested in the sort of underground creators. So in the 50s that would be the Beats, Burroughs, Bowles, Ginsberg, and then through the music, Bob Dylan, Tom Waits. These underground characters, people that are forging their own way, people that are doing something completely different, people that are taking chances, and they're not playing to the audience. They're not trying to sell records or sell paintings per se. They're just exploring the medium, and they're being honest to themselves and authentic. So, in writing, I would, Bukowski is a good example of that. Somebody that just has no concern whatsoever for any kind of audience or the reader. I mean, one of the things you get asked when you approach publishers is, who's your demographic and who's your reader? Well, it's something I don't care about. And it's something, if you look at the history of literature, you'll find a whole bunch of people that really didn't care about readers because they were exploring the mediums, because they're artists, because they're exploring the art of writing. And so good literature is about writing. It's about reading the writing. It doesn't matter about the stories and the characters and what you're trying to say. It matters about how the word is on the page. And that's what's important to me. So my new book is going to be an attempt to create a real piece of literature, regardless of the audience.
Yeah, I dig it. That's so well said, and it's so true. I love Bukowski. One of my favorite quotes from him, I actually quoted it the other day, was, "We're born geniuses and buried idiots." I was talking to a teacher about children and about how many walls we end up putting around ourselves as we get older. But, when you're young, you're just a flower out there. The one thing I remember about a lot, I haven't read Bukowski for a while, but I went through my period, and I love his writing. And some of the letters that he got from people were hallmarks of his poetry. What's been some good responses that you've gotten from people for your work?
Well, the people that read it, like it uniformly. So it's fun, it's well read, it's well written, it's funny, it's informative. So I've had a lot of really good reviews, but it's just hard to sell books these days. I mean, a lot of people don't read anymore. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, do you have an audio book?" Because I don't really read anymore. I don't read books. Well, that's I don't know how you get around that.
Yeah.
So it's a sad fact that it's very hard to sell real literature. In fact, I just looked at a chart fairly recently, and it was the type of genres that sell. And so you got the chart, and it's high up on one side, and then it shrinks down to the other side. So on the left side, you've got these tall columns of historical romance and Harlequin romance and all these adventure stuff and crime novels. All these basically just pulp fiction, just genre pieces. They're just written to amuse somebody that doesn't care about writing.
Yeah.
So, and you see these things, and all these books go down and down and down, and then right at the far right, you've got this tiny little blip. You can barely see it, and then it says underneath literature. So that's where we're at. We're experiencing the death of literature right now. So we're experiencing the death of art and culture, basically, because everything's being dumbed down to such a level that nobody knows what art is anymore. I mean, nobody knows what art is in painting. You go into these art galleries, and there's a bunch of derivative stuff that's been done 100 times before, and somebody's just copied something they've seen before and put it together, and it looks like art, and everybody says, oh, yeah, that's art. But I don't think it is. Yeah. I think art is about, it's about a process. It's about a creative process that the artist gets through. And the actual finished product is secondary to that.
Yeah, that's so well said.
We don't value that process anymore. All we want is a finished product that looks like what we think it should look like. And then that's the case of any of the art. In the music too. I mean, the music is terrible. There's almost nothing worth listening to anymore. Everything I hear if I hear something, and I talk to my friends about this, and my younger friends, and I say, well, there's nothing new, there's nothing original, there's nothing authentic. Name me something that is. And they go, oh yeah, this guy. And we'll put it on, and I'll go, oh yeah, that sounds like some band from the 70s. Usually it's from the 60s or 70s. You can trace this stuff back, all this indie rock and this so-called new music. It's all completely derivative of stuff that's gone before. There's nothing original or authentic about it. So everybody's impersonating somebody else, and everybody's writing songs that were written 40 years ago. So, it's a sad state of affairs. But that's what I feel like. I feel like I'm witnessing the death of art and culture and literature and painting and all the arts.
Yeah.
Now everybody's on TikTok,
Yeah.
They're watching people posing in front of the camera on TikTok, and and people will pass that around, in a social group and say, oh, look at this, it's so funny, look at this guy playing with his cat. And they'll think, wow, this is where we've come, This is where we're at with culture. It's a disaster.
So, you've been around quite a bit, and I'm curious, if you had a dream tonight and you run into your younger version, say in your 20s, and you could give your younger version one piece of advice based on the wisdom that you've gained throughout your lifetime, what would you say to your younger version?
I'd say just keep doing exactly what you're doing. Everything's going to be fine, and it's all going to work out because it did.
That's great.
I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't go back and try to change the course of my life because it's been such a great ride, and I haven't had, catastrophes and disasters and, great regrets and all these things. I haven't had that. So maybe I just got lucky. Maybe, my attitude has saved me from those things. But no, I don't have anything that I would change. I wouldn't go back and change the course of anything. And I would just tell myself to do exactly what you're doing because it all worked out.
What are you the proudest of? When you sit back and think about your life, what's something that comes up that you're really happy that it happened?
I think in terms of legacy, I'm proud of the books I've written and the films I've made, and I've got 5 albums, and all this stuff is on my website, by the way, jimifritz.ca. That's jimifritz.ca. And so all of that stuff that I'm kind of leaving behind, I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I did that stuff, and I'm kind of amazed that I did some of that stuff. So I look back and say, how the hell did you do that? It was never really planned or labored over. It would just these things just kind of came about. I was just kind of driven to do things and did them. So yeah, the stuff I'm leaving behind. There's a few organizations I started. There's a organization here called Civic Society of Independent Filmmakers. I founded that society about 25 years ago. And now it's flourishing, and it's, I started it. I was the president for the first 5 years and got it up and running and funded. And now it's a huge going concern with a big film festival. And, so I look back on that and think fondly. All the people's lives have changed because throughout the rave years, I saw lots of people's lives just changed forever. So that was pretty satisfying.
Everyone has a perception of you. Your family, your friends, your fans, in writing and music. But ultimately, you live your life. You have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
Me? I think I'm just a guy trying to get through life and keep myself amused. I don't have any grandiose views. I don't think I'm any more important than anybody else. I think I've been lucky. I'm a lucky person because most things, pretty much everything, has always worked out for me. But I always thought it would. I always had that attitude that everything's going to work out, and it always has. So, I guess lucky would be one word that I describe myself.
It's a great way to end it. Jimmy, thank you for taking some time out, man. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, and music around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.